Okay, Miss Sharon, come over here and do show and tell for the camera.
No, I don't do that. I already did it. Oh, you don't want that again.
Someone online might want to know. Okay.
All right. Do you really want me to explain?
Yeah, come on.
Show and tell. All right.
Up by the podium would be good.
All right. Okay.
Just let me give it to you. Hi, it's Pastor Jim. We're doing our class this morning. It's going to be a little different class. I'm just warning you ahead of time. Sharon brought in some
fig trimmings. I have a fig shrub. I'm calling it shrub. I'm not certain if I'm supposed to use the terminology tree at my house, and it's close to my house to protect it so it keeps growing and doesn't freeze out in the winter. And I just wanted to show that now is the time of the year that we are to prune it back. It has a very small beginning of a bud that's beginning to show a little green growth to it. But just wanted you to see that. The other thing about this, I'll have to wait until later in the spring and early summer, but the leaf sizes can easily be about the size of a large dinner plate. It's amazing how big the leaf can be. So just wanted to share that.
So how big is the fig go?
The fig itself, probably not much longer than 2 inches.
Is it a dark color?
Very sweet. There's some green and a beautiful kind of deep, like a burgundy red inside the actual opening. Once you take the outer flesh and you open it apart. I will tell you, ants love them, so if you don't get them before the ants get them, you don't get them.
Ants love them.
Ants do, so you really have to pay attention to them. When they're starting to get ripe, you want to kind of every couple of days check on them.
Thank you, Sharon.
Certainly.
Sharon told us you were going to bring a leaf in when a leaf comes.
I'll try.
And
do that.
maybe even
Some samples?
a fruit when it comes in.
Maybe. We'll see. Last year was most unique. They lasted a long time this season, but they also dried up all the actual stem. Like they just hang off the different notch here. And about that long. And they actually dried up, and I actually had 2 that still were dried on and in place yesterday when I was pruning.
Wow.
They just got hard, and that was the end of it. I think it's the weather.
Yeah.
The rain.
Okay.
Sorry, taking too much time.
Since we're doing other things, if you're watching online, newsletters available. You get our email, go to emmanueleaston.org. Should be a link on the front page there that will take you to them. You can learn about Holy Week. We have advertisement on the back. And on the email that went out, there was an advertisement as well. Today's class is going to be different. We're doing the review from last week's material. I got that much done, but with everything else going on, didn't have time to do the new stuff. So I brought a video for you. It's a 10-minute video of the picture behind me. And so they're going to go through and explain it. And the part that I would like us to spend a few minutes for at the end then will be over here on the right-hand side about the ending of Mark, since we're coming up to, since we've obviously entered Holy Week and all of that. It's an interesting conversation to have about that. And I'd like you to watch them as what's really, well, I'm not going to say anything more about the video. You can watch it in a little bit. So I did provide the material from last time. I did put those over there. Sorry if I got them there late. We have the permanent camera installation going on as we speak. Had to show Mark a couple of things there. So it's been a weird week. I don't know. Oh, and I should mention that we will not have class next week on Easter Sunday. And then on the 11th, I shall not be here. So we were not going to have class. I'll see if Reverend Halki would like to do something. Yared Halki would be here. He's the Ethiopian pastor who's been here before. You'll probably enjoy him more anyway. He has wonderful, interesting stories. So he would be an interesting person. So let's see. We'll start with a kiss. With a kiss, with the prayer, because I just looked at the kiss. And then we'll continue from that point. Heavenly Father, continue to open our eyes and hearts to you. And as we look again, take a longer paused look at Judas in the garden and all that that meant. help us to consider that and look at what we might have done. Look at how we desert you, how we do that in our lives too. So help us in this class and this Holy Week. We ask in your most precious name. Amen. So the review is, there's quite a bit of stuff I wanted to talk about again today because we went through it pretty quick last time. There are two instances where the word Eustace appears in verse 43. If you have one of our little thingamajiggers, that's the kind of grade thing. And then also in verse 45. So immediately, it's interesting that this has not been used by Mark, one of his favorite words, since chapter 11, verse 3. And so it's like he starts a new section now, and so he's bringing up some new material out there. I suppose one of the most shocking things, if you think about it, is what it says in verse 43 about that Judas is one of the 12. One of Jesus' inner circle is the one who betrays him. Now that seems somewhat surprising, I guess. We looked at number 3, talks about a mob. It apparently that they would bring locals with them. It was common to get a robber or someone, and so that's why they have swords and clubs with them. Number 4 talks about chief priests, scribes, and elders. These people will consist of the Sanhedrin, and so that's who we have there. They themselves have not come, but they have sent their representatives along. And then we looked at a signal. It's interesting. A pre-arranged signal of a kiss. What do you think about using a kiss as a symbol? Does that seem inappropriate to you? It seems to me to be an inappropriate
I
thing.
agree.
It's kind of the exact opposite of what you should do. And what's interesting is if you have the place, let's see, number 6 and number 8, both are kiss. Phileo, or filio, we often say, which is the word from which we get brotherly love and all that stuff. Interesting. Notice it says there are 3 meanings possible: love, like to, or kiss. I never knew that that was used for kiss. I guess I forgot that. It seems to me sad that that's somewhat of an intimate thing that's used for betrayal. In verse 45, it's a different word for kiss. It is kata phileo. If you notice, we have the word phileo in there, and kata is a compound verb, and it seems to emphasize it more. It seems to, one of the commentators says that he embraced and kissed him, almost in a showy way, and kind of like he's happy, and I don't know. It seems to me it's I don't know how I want to explain that. I guess number 10 got there a little bit. It's almost like he's delighted that what he did is working so well. I don't know. Tim has a comment.
But wasn't he feeling that he was accomplishing his purpose by doing this?
I'm sorry, one more time. I was increasing volume.
That he seemed to be delighted in doing it, but didn't he feel led to do this?
Judas is. Yeah, Judas, yeah. Is Judas used in it? No. Judas wants to do this. It seems to be what he really wants to do. I mean, he's not kind of coerced into it. It's a free activity of the free will that he's doing, definitely.
But he believed by doing this that
He's accomplishing what God wants, I guess.
Right.
Or the other way, I wonder this often, is he saying, Jesus has failed in what I thought he should do, so therefore, forget it. Let's get rid of him. Who knows? Or maybe if we kill Jesus, the revolution will happen. People will be upset. I don't know. I did spend some time, if you were with us last week, we talked about the kiss of death. I did look up that a little bit. That's number 11. This is from Sapphire's New Political Dictionary. I don't know why it was in Political Dictionary, but the kiss of death, unwelcome support from an unpopular source, occasionally engineered by the opposition. The phrase is derived from the kiss of Judas and the betrayal of Christ, so that's apparently where the phrase comes from. It is also described from a gangland custom called omerta, and said to have begun in Sicily. In the mobs, a kiss from the boss is tantamount to arriving at the office one morning and finding your rug gone. I don't know, I guess you're going to die is what it said, right? It was also, it used to be called the Judas Kiss, and now it's called the kiss of death. I don't know. Have you heard that phrase often?
Yes.
Ever heard that phrase before?
Yeah.
Kiss of death, yes.
So it's an interesting phrase. Interesting. Okay.
I don't see it as Judas being delighted and happy and all that. I see it as being hugging Jesus, saying, I hate to do this, but somebody has to do it. I was told to do it. I have to do it. And it's kind of a last farewell, and he goes out ashamed. He hanged himself. I mean,
I think
he
that
wasn't tickled about doing that.
the delight part is the plan's working.
I don't
Everything's
see
going.
any delight. I don't see
Oh, no.
that he would have delight. I think that's a total,
Okay.
total misreading of it, misinterpretation.
I've skipped over number 7. There's an interesting thing about arrest. Krateo, take into custody, seize. It's kind of used interestingly there. And Jesus will emphasize that they're really doing the wrong thing to him, kind of. Number 12 is interesting about cut off his ear. It's mentioned, but none of the Matthew, Mark, or Luke do not say who did it. Not interesting. It's only John who's doing it years later. I wrote down there for you what Michael Card suggests. I'll read that because I didn't get it out to online people. If Peter were still alive when Mark wrote his gospel, he was not purposefully concealing his identity. More likely it was a matter of the church's safety. It would not look good for the leader of a young suspect church to be known as one who wielded swords. And don't think for a moment Peter was aiming at his ear. His stroke was horizontal, clipping only the little ear or earlobe. The fact is, he was aiming for the man's neck. Interesting that he is able to slip away, though, isn't it? Isn't that interesting? He takes out a sword, and the word for sword there indicates it's more of a small, compact version instead of a long thing that he could kind of pull out, and takes a swipe at him. And he is not taken into custody either. That's just interesting to me. I don't know. Jesus is captured. 15. That's from down in verse 48. As if I were a criminal, a robber, a highwayman. It seems Jesus is saying what they're doing is incorrect. They did not need to do that. However, scriptures have to be fulfilled, and that's why it must happen there. 18 from verse 50. They all deserted him and ran away. I think if I were translating it, I would translate it abandoned him. I think they're pretty close, but something about abandoned emphasizes how Jesus then is abandoned by everyone and is alone. And as he gets closer to the cross, more and more support is kind of peeled away from him. You notice when Peter, James, and John were in the garden, stay awake, keep coming, stay awake with me, that was gone. The 12, none of them were there and
Why do
helping.
you think that happened?
I'm sorry?
Why do you think they did that? Why did they behave that way? Were they afraid? Were they?
Well, remember, they had said that they would be,
Didn't want
where's
to
my
be
thing? Where's
associated
my
with
quote?
them,
Where's
or
my
what?
quote? In 1431, they all promised that they would not run away. They would, no, we will never deny you, we will never desert you. And yet everybody did,
Yeah, that's what
including
they did.
Peter. Everybody did. I think you have to remember that Satan is alive and well and active. That would be my first answer. I think he's active there. I think in the garden that he was helping to cause sleep in people. Remember, Mark's gospel talks about that Satan, in Matthew and Luke, it says that Satan left, I forget which one said, until a more opportune time. In Mark's gospel, it doesn't state that. And so Mark seems to indicate Satan's presence. And I think, it's just me, you're welcome for your choice, but I think he's involved trying to make it. Let's take as much away from Jesus as we can so that he's alone and maybe he'll say no. I think that's behind it. That's my opinion. And it's just my opinion, so you're free for yours. Oh, number 20 I found interesting. I just found this as I was reviewing my notes. In 1431, where there's it's interesting how there are 5 Greek words used for both. And Volt goes off on talking about how there's a lot of similarities there. And in English, it doesn't look anything alike. That's always fascinating to me. I always thought the young man, that's number 21, that the young man was younger, but according to the usual use of nismos, it's somewhere between 20 and 40. I thought he'd be younger than that. I had him as a teen all this time. Linen cloth, we looked at that before. You can read that. They caught hold of him just like the last thing I wanted to talk about, I guess, is 24, 25, and 26. We don't know who this guy is. He's only mentioned here in Mark. The early church fathers, you'll see that reference in number 26, they conjecture, it's an interesting word that Lane used, that it's Mark. And so that's where we get the idea that it's Mark. It's not somebody else making it up. Michael Card jumps in all feet first in his book, The Gospel of Mark, The Gospel of Passion. Let me read that one. It's number 25. In Mark 14, 51, 52, we find a tantalizing possibility. Mark tells us of a young man wrapped only in a linen cloth who had been following Jesus. When the mob tries to seize him, he spins around and runs away naked. Now, there are 2 different types. Some suggest that it was like a sheet that he threw on. He was getting up, the mob went by, we'll read more about that, went by the house, he threw the sheet on because he was sleeping, tried to go warn Jesus. There's another word which actually would be more of a garment that's just wrapped around that would able to unwrap, did not have sleeves. There's another one, the word is listed there for something that would have sleeves, and it probably did not. That's why it came off so easy. If Mark's house was indeed the one Jesus used for the Last Supper, that's a guess. Perhaps young Mark knew, another guess, of their intention to spend the night in the garden. In the middle of the night, hearing the mob pass by his house on their way to arrest Jesus, he leaps out of bed, hurriedly wraps himself in a linen sheet, hoping to get to Jesus in time to warn him and the disciples about what is to happen. Instead, arriving too late, Mark is almost caught and arrested. He's almost taken into captivity, having identified himself as being with Jesus and the 12. It is a glorious, fascinating, and ultimately unprovable assumption. We were sitting and listening to Card as he talked. He didn't quote himself exactly this way. And people kind of went, when he said that. And he said, I don't know if it's true, but I want it to be true. That was kind of an interesting thing. The reason I put number 26 there is for the last three plus lines. If it is Mark, or whomever it was, his primary purpose for including this vignette, however, appears to have been to emphasize the fact that all fled, leaving Jesus alone in the custody of the police. Well, whomever. No one remained with Jesus, not even a valiant young man who intended to follow him. And so that's an interesting quote. Everybody's gone. It's Jesus going with these folks, and we go to the trial. So we will pick that up much later. I'll just spend a little bit of time on that. And I wanted to share a video with you. Again, I apologize not getting everything done this week, but that's doing the best we can. This is a very interesting video. Yes, I think so, because I'm going to show it to you. Because it explains this picture. And as you watch him draw the picture and explain it, I want you to pay careful attention to, I guess it's 1, 2, 3. Those are 3 big points. I guess it's 1, 2, 3, 4 big points. and then we end up over here. And I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about that. So let me pull this over, get it started. If you're online and for some reason they take us off, as far as I understand it, we're okay to use this here. So if they take us off for some reason, we will put a link up where you can find this online for free. Well, I said turn on, come on. Thank you. No signal, yes, I've got signal. Oh, so we play it that way, huh? Am I close? Yes, enter full screen, please.
One of the first accounts of the life of Jesus, and our earliest historical traditions link this book to a Christian scribe named Mark, or John Mark. He was a co-worker with Paul and a close partner with Peter. And in fact, an ancient church historian named Mark.
Sorry, lost my sound.
In the first line of the book, Mark makes this claim about Jesus. It's the beginning of the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. Now what's interesting is that this is the only time Mark is going to tell you what he thinks. For the rest of the book, he's going to influence you by simply putting Jesus' actions and words in front of you and showing you how other people react to him. Now Mark's designed the story of Jesus as a drama with 3 acts. The first one set in Galilee. The third one is set in Jerusalem, and the second act shows Jesus on the way from one place to the other. And each of the acts focuses on a repeated theme. So in Act 1, everybody's blown away by Jesus, and they're wondering, who is this Jesus? In Act 2, it's the disciples who are struggling to understand what it means for Jesus to be the Messiah. And then in Act 3, we watch the surprising paradox of how Jesus becomes the Messianic King. Let's just dive in, and you'll see how it unfolds. After the opening line, Mark begins with a quotation from the ancient prophets Isaiah and Malachi, who said that God would send a messenger to Israel to prepare them for when God would show up himself to rescue his people in his own way. And Mark introduces John the Baptist as that messenger, and then right when you expect God to show up personally, Mark introduces Jesus. And as he comes onto the scene, the heavens open, God's Spirit descends on Jesus, and God says, "You are my beloved Son." After this, Mark places in front of us a summary of Jesus' core message. He went about Galilee, announcing the good news that God's kingdom has come near. Jesus is carrying forward the story from the Old Testament scriptures about God's rescue operation for his world. Through Jesus, God is restoring his reign over the world by confronting and defeating evil and its hold on people's lives, and then by inviting them to live under his reign by following Jesus. From here, Mark's given us a big block of stories showing us Jesus' power as he brings God's kingdom. He goes about healing people whose bodies are sick or broken or under the oppression of dark spiritual powers. And Jesus even does something that for Jewish people only God has the right to do. He forgives people's sins. And Jesus' actions here produce lots of different responses. So some people follow him and become his disciples. Other people don't know what to think, and still others reject him completely. Especially Israel's leaders who accuse him of blaspheming God and being empowered by evil. But Jesus isn't surprised by these responses. In fact, he draws attention to it. In chapter 4, Mark has collected many of Jesus' parables about the hidden, mysterious nature of God's kingdom. And Jesus says that his message is like seed falling on different types of soil. Some are receptive, some are not. Or it's like a mustard seed that's very tiny. It seems insignificant, But then it grows huge and surprises everyone. Jesus' point is that he really is the Messiah, bringing God's kingdom, but it doesn't look like what anybody expected. And this growing confusion about Jesus among the crowds is connected to a key idea Mark emphasizes at the end of Act 1, that even among Jesus' disciples there's confusion. Even they are struggling to grasp who Jesus really is, and that brings us to Act 2. It begins with a crucial conversation. Jesus takes the disciples aside and he asks, "Who do you all say that I am?" And Peter speaks up, saying, "You're the Messiah." But it becomes clear that for Peter, this means that Jesus is a victorious military king from the line of David who rescued Israel from the Romans. But for Jesus to be the Messiah means that he's the suffering servant king of Isaiah 53, who will bring God's rule by giving up his life in Jerusalem. And the disciples, they don't get it. They think following King Jesus is going to mean fame and status and importance, and Jesus makes it clear that following him is actually like dying, like carrying your own cross. It means rejecting violence and pride and selfishness, and giving one's life out for others in acts of service and love. He has the same conversation with them 2 more times, and it all culminates in Jesus' important statement that the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to become a servant and give his life as a ransom for many. The disciples still don't get it. They respond in confusion and fear. And so here in Act 2, Mark has placed another key story that echoes the book's introduction. Jesus takes 3 of his disciples up to a mountain, and he's suddenly transformed. He's radiating with light and glory, and a cloud envelops them. Now, this is just like the glory of the God of Israel that showed up long ago on Mount Sinai. And then the 2 prophets who stood in God's presence on Mount Sinai, Moses and Elijah, they appeared next to Jesus as God announces again, "This is my beloved Son." Now, by placing this story in the middle of all of these conversations in Act 2, Mark is making an astounding claim that Jesus, God's Son, is the physical embodiment of God's own glory. And in Jesus, the glorious God of Israel is going to become king by suffering and dying for the sins of his own people. It's a puzzling claim that confuses and scares the disciples as they leave the mountain. Which brings us to Act 3. Jesus makes a very public royal entry into Jerusalem for Passover. People are hailing him as the Messiah. Then he enters into the temple courtyard and he asserts his royal authority by running out the thieves and crooks and stopping the sacrificial system. Then this kicks off a whole week of Jesus debating and confronting the leaders of Israel, condemning their hypocrisy, and so they set in motion a plan to have him killed. And Jesus warns his disciples, predicting that Jerusalem and its temple will be destroyed within a generation, and his disciples will be persecuted just like him, until he returns one day to bring God's kingdom fully over the world. And it all leads up to the final night. Jesus has his last Passover meal with the disciples, a symbolic meal that told the story of Israel's liberation from slavery through the death of the Passover lamb. And Jesus takes these symbols and he gives them new meaning. They point to the liberation from sin and death that will happen through the death of the suffering servant Messiah. From here, the story rushes forward to Jesus' arrest, his trial before Israel's priests and the Roman governor Pilate, all resulting in Jesus' crucifixion. And it culminates in a key scene that matches the important scenes from Acts 1 and 2. Except this time, it's darkness that descends, not a cloud. And instead of the divine voice from heaven, it's Jesus' voice crying out before he dies. And then most surprising is that it's a Roman soldier who sees Jesus die, who grasps and then announces who Jesus is. This man was the Son of God. He's the first person in the story to recognize the story's shocking claim about Jesus' identity, that it's the crucified Son of God who's the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, who died for his friends and for his enemies. After this, Jesus' body is placed in a tomb, and on the first day of the new week, 2 women from his disciples come to the tomb, and they discover that the tomb is empty, the stone's rolled away. And an angelic man informs them that Jesus isn't here, that he's risen from the dead. And so he orders them to go and tell this good news to the other disciples, that Jesus is alive, that he'll meet them back up in Galilee. And the women, they're freaked out. Mark says that they fled from the tomb in terror, telling no one, for they were afraid. And that's how the book ends, with Jesus' disciples showing the same kind of fear and confusion that concluded Acts 2 and 1. Now, if you look in your Bible, you'll see that the Gospel of Mark has more to its ending, where Jesus appears, he speaks to his disciples, but there's also a note there telling you that that ending is not part of the original book, that is only found in later, less reliable manuscripts. Now, it's possible that the original ending got lost, or that Mark actually never finished writing his account, but it's more likely that this abrupt ending is intentional to make a point. The entire story has focused on the shocking claim that puzzled Jesus' disciples from beginning to end. That is the suffering, crucified, and risen Jesus, who's the Messiah, the Son of God. That God's love and upside-down kingdom were revealed as Jesus died for the sins of the world. And so the story ends without closure, and it forces you, the reader, to grapple with this very strange and scandalous claim about Jesus. And are you going to run away like the women? Or are you going to recognize Jesus as your king and go and tell the good news? And only you can answer that question. And that's what the Gospel of Mark is all about.
Sorry, we lost our online friends there someplace. So, yeah, I know. Huh. Sorry if you were on and you lost it. We had trouble with our internet stream there. So, I hope you heard I was having a lot of technical difficulties today. All three end with the disciples' confusion and some fear. What do you think? Any thoughts on the ending? You guys are awful quiet again. Mr. Tim.
Well, I think, or I feel that Fred is right, that he couldn't be happy doing what he did and then suddenly be repentant, but he believed that he was fulfilling the prophecy. And then as when we make a mistake, that God in his loving way rebukes us and points out the error of our ways. And so, as Fred said, that he went and threw the money back at the priest and hung himself. So obviously he was not happy, but he was.
Interesting that Mark says nothing else after the kiss about Judas. He's left out entirely. Don't know why. We can play games and try to figure that out, but that was not important for him to follow that line of the story. He got him to the point where he betrays Jesus, and that's it.
But sometimes we can be so convinced that we're doing the right thing, and then the Lord shows us the error of our ways. So,
I think what's interesting to me about all of that is this is the area where it's important. Where was Judas in all of this? What did he think about Jesus? Who do you say that I am? You are a Messiah. Now, for the average person in that time frame, the Jewish person, this is probably what they were looking for, was someone who would defeat the Romans. We're talking about an earthly kingdom. If you want to read something interesting, read John chapter 6, I believe it is, which is Jesus' feeding of the 5,000. That's how John does it. And there you'll see that at one point, after they're having a long discussion about bread and Jesus being the bread of life and all of this, that the people want to take Jesus and make him king by force. This is the type of king they're wanting. And yet this whole act, as they call it here, Act 2 on the way, deals with all three conversations, what I would call passion predictions, say what it means for Jesus to be the Savior. And so they have trouble each time understanding what it means. This shall never happen to you is what Peter will say in the first one. Over on the second one, it's, they still don't, I mean, none of them they understand. Total misunderstandings. You know, we want to be number 2 and 3 person in the kingdom and all. They don't understand. So I think in there someplace, Judas is still involved in this. Judas Iscariot, some people think that he was part of the revolt, if you will, and had come in that way. We don't know. I mean, that's an interesting concept, but again, it's like Michael Card saying that the Passover was held at John Mark's house and he saw him go by. I mean, it's maybe more than wishful thinking, but we don't know. The thing we do know is if you follow Judas' story out, he feels bad, I guess is the way to say it, about what he did. It's not going the way he thought it would, I think. As when he does the kiss there, we don't have the kiss. Do we have the kiss? No, we don't have the kiss. When he does the kiss, he hopes to maybe to set inside, this will cause it to happen. I mean, around this most recent election, I don't go into politics very often, but people thought things were going to happen, right? This would happen, that would happen. It seems like Judas hoped that by doing this, maybe he was pushing that things would happen. Didn't turn out the way he wanted. Gives the money back. Was this an unforgivable sin on his part? No. Could it be forgivable? Yeah. Was it forgiven? Oh, that's the hard one there, right? Probably not, right? It looks like no. But as the midst of hanging himself, could he say, oops, I'm sorry, please forgive me? It's possible, right? I mean, suicide is not an unforgivable sin that I know of. It's possible. I had a girlfriend in high school whose best friend's brother, and that was lovely, he killed himself. 17-year-old kid. Why did he kill himself? Because his girlfriend dumped him. And he then heard from Jesus. This is where it gets weird. This is what he wrote. I mean, I didn't know the kid personally, but he heard from Jesus that Jesus is calling me home now, so I have to kill myself. You know, and what's interesting is his pastor, he lived in a different state. Pastor refused to bury him because he committed suicide. A lot of stuff going on there. This is a long time ago, too. I mean, I'm an old person and all. So, suicide is not an unforgivable sin. We don't know what goes on. Maybe you'll see Judas in heaven. I doubt it. It's just me. I'm judging. I understand that. But it's possible that he did repent right at the end. If he had, would Jesus have received him back as a disciple? Wouldn't that be fun, right? Can you imagine that? Yeah, I'm the guy that betrayed Jesus. You want to talk about a story of forgiveness and repentance, that would make a great one. So you could write that book, Tim. You could do that. If Judas didn't kill himself. What would happen if Judas didn't kill himself? That'd be fun. Yeah. Tim?
I always felt that's one of the sad parts, that as Fred said, it was the opposite of being happy. He was desolate, ready to kill himself, and all he had to do was turn to the Lord, and God would have forgiven him. And that's the whole point of it.
And we don't know why he did. Apparently, he didn't see.
Well,
Even then, he didn't see who Jesus was and the grace and mercy that was available to him right there. And that's what he missed.
And that's what I said. Fred was right. He was overcome with grief, and just that was the only way out. That's, I guess, most times when someone commits suicide, they realize that the next 15 minutes is eternity.
It's a very sad thing, and the people that live through it, that's where it gets difficult. I'm interested in the first line. I'm interested then in here when the voice speaks from heaven, when the voice speaks again from heaven, and the misunderstanding that occurs, and then the final voice, this man was the Son of God, here, where it is a Roman centurion who speaks that. If you think about it, if you're a Roman centurion, first of all, you have to be a Roman citizen, as I understand it, And that if you're saying this, you should move this in case you can't see all the way down there. If you're saying this, you are probably committing a crime, if I understand correctly, because who? Caesar is God. And so he's saying here, it could be construed that what he says is something that could cost him his life too, or at least his commission in that sense. And so here it is. The first, it says here, the folks say, the first person in the story to grasp Jesus' identity, the crucified Son of God, is the Messiah. Now, if you were with us when we looked at the person, remember, applying, it was Mary, right, applying the ointment at Jesus. One of the commentators says he thinks that she knew it all at that point, and that she knew that Jesus was going to suffer and die, and that she was doing this to get him ready for his burial. So perhaps, there's another person, but here's the one that publicly says that for the first time. And I am fascinated then that verse 8 ends, then we get into this whole mess of the end of the gospel where it is that they fled from the tomb in terror, telling no one, for they were afraid. That would be one heck of a way to end a book, wouldn't it? First of all, if that's true, not saying it is, if that's true, we have 3 other books that give us the rest of the story, right? I mean, it's all there. And then we have these other verses from 9 to 20 that finish it off, not in the earliest manuscripts, which is interesting. In biblical studies, the way that you conclude the authenticity of a text, it's assumed that the older it is, the closer it is to the original source. And so the earliest ones did not. In your King James Bible or in other similar Bibles, you will not have it, but in newer ones you will have a line or something that will say, not in the original text, whatever like that. And so for some people that causes a great deal of trouble. Would it bother you if the gospel ended at that point? What would it do in your mind if this part were not there? If it ended with the women fleeing from the tomb in terror, telling no one, for they were afraid. Now, the folks that put this picture together, this video together, I think that's where they want it to end, because they think it forces you to come up with your decision, if you will. Is this true for you? There were questions here, here, and here. What do you believe? Do you believe this is true? It's an interesting thought. Interesting thought. Commentary I have that's a Lutheran commentary. They're coming out with this commentary series for the whole thing, and the Gospel of Mark has 2 books to do it in the commentary series that are both about this size. So we're talking about pretty big volumes, right? And the second one has 2 authors to it, because the author Volz is the one who did the majority of the work. He stops his work right here. And so the editor of the whole series finishes it off. And I find that interesting. So it would have been fun to sit in the editorial meetings about the creation of this book to hear the arguments and the thoughts going on, where I don't know what happened. I was not there, not even going to guess, but it would have been fun to hear the discussions of where it is. But if it's true, that the abrupt intending is intentional, that Mark emphasizes the shocking claim that the crucified and risen Jesus is the Messiah, the lack of closure forces you to ask, will you run away, or will you recognize the crucified Jesus as your king? We could drop Judas in there too, right? He basically ran away, you could say, right? He didn't believe. But what will you do? Will you believe, or will you run away in fear? It makes an interesting discussion point. I can tell you it's also controversial. And so now that we're putting this out there, hello internet, we're back online now. Of course, this part's going on. The part that wasn't controversial didn't go on, but this part's going on. So I don't know. It's interesting to consider. As we go through Holy Week, think about this. Think about your part. What would you do in the various parts to come. On Monday, Thursday, think about late on Monday, Thursday, being in the garden with Jesus. Stay awake. You could be one of the larger group of disciples. Stay awake. Not one of the three. Maybe even put yourself as Peter, James, and John and get close. Be one of those three. Stay awake. Watch and pray with me. Put yourself in Peter's spot. Read through it like that's you. Jesus says to Peter, Simon, he doesn't call him rock there, Simon. He's not being very rock-like there. Could you not stay awake? And then everybody flees. Maybe you could be the young streaker in the gospel, the one who runs away, leaving your garment behind because you're afraid to be caught. Isn't that fascinating to think about? All of that. And then, would you have gone to the cross? Would you have been, notice ladies, you come out very, very well. The men come out very, very poorly. The ladies are the one who are at the cross. Now, John's there, but we believe John was much younger because he lived so much longer. But only one that we know for certain was John, with the ladies who were there. Can you imagine? Would you have gone to the cross? Would you have been in that locked upper room, staying there, afraid that you might be next? That seems to be a lot of fear in there. And then here's the fun question. So if they did come, we have other gospels that say some of the ladies came and told. We'll put Mary Magdalene. She comes and says, because that's what we have. Would you believe her? Or would you think her story is just a story? Can you imagine that? This week, put yourself there. Use your imagination. This guy that writes this Michael Card, he likes to, it's called the Biblical Imagination Series. He's not making stuff up. What he wants you to do is to put yourself in the text and imagine that you're there. What would you do in these moments? And so for Holy Week, put yourself there. What would you do? What would you do if you were Peter? What would you do in any of these cases? But what would you do? Would you be here at the cross, standing there? Would you be willing at that point to say, this man was the Son of God? Would you have run away from the tomb, afraid, and tell no one? Or would you tell everybody that you met? Give you a lot more questions tonight. That's all I had for today. Sorry. We're not going to have class next week or the week after. We will resume then. When I'm sitting at home for a while there, I will hopefully have a chance to catch up. And so we'll finish off all of this fun stuff. Mr. Tim has a question or a comment.
Yeah. Do we know anything more about the Centurion?
The Bible doesn't say anything more about him. There was it a novel or no? There's something about the robe. There's that story, and that he could have had it there. But no, we do not. That story is not followed up, as far as I know. That's another fun one you could follow up. You could write a book on that. What difference would that make if you were this guy? If you were there and you said that, how would it change your life? That's an interesting question.
You become an enemy of the state.
I forget the robe. Doesn't the robe give lots of power or something in the movie? I forget that. It's been a while. They used to put those movies on at Easter time, right? Now they put other weird stuff on that doesn't go along with it. Okay. Other thoughts or comments? Any comments about the picture again? Sorry that if you were online, we had some trouble with our internet service here. It should be recorded on the card in the little camera, so I'll make sure it gets put up in its entirety so you can see that. You can also go to, I'll put up there where you can find the video and watch it on your own. They have videos of they have pictures like this of most of the books, I think now, of the Bible where they try to explain it in this way, and several videos as well to explain. So we'll have a short prayer and close off this section as we pray. Gracious Lord, in this Holy Week, continue to open our hearts to who you are and what you are doing in our lives. Help us to ponder this Holy Week story. Help us to use our imaginations and put ourselves in it and try to understand the people who were there and what happened to them and ponder what we would do in that situation. But especially help us see you there and help us see you for who you are, the very Son of God who came to suffer and die to pay off the debt of all of our sin. May we see that and believe, not run away scared, but instead, in response to you, tell everyone what we have seen and heard and believe. We ask this in Jesus' most precious name. Amen.